Their alliance worked because they understood the current dangers in the same way. They plotted their course accordingly, with an eye on the future. If he could get Prince Zanak onto the throne, at least the weight on his right shoulder would be lifted. He said he would make me his prime minister, and it probably wasn't a joke. So the weight on my left shoulder will probably stay the same. Even so, the kingdom's situation should improve. Marquis Revan's goal for the near future was to ensure Prince Zanak became king. If he failed, the kingdom would be one step closer to ruin. Now I have Princess Rena's help, so things should become slightly easier in the future. Muttering his ideas and strategies as he pondered, Marquis Revan sighed deeply. Sometimes he wanted to leave it all behind. On more than one occasion, he entertained the idea of simply destroying everything out of frustration. He was building a castle in the sand, and there were children running amok. Under those circumstances, destructive desires probably couldn't be helped, but there was a reason he was able to endure. Knock, knock. The sound came from lower on the door. For a moment, Marquis Revan's face was completely out of character. His expression almost melted, the corners of his eyes lowered and his lips relaxed. Oops, that one do. I can be looking like that. He forced himself to pull it together, smacked his cheeks lightly, and fixed his messy hair. Then he raised his voice so the person on the other side of the metallic door would be able to hear. He made sure his voice was gentle and not angry. Come in. The speed at which the heavy door opened indicated how much the person who pushed it had waited for that moment. A child appeared. The adorable, innocent boy's cheeks stood out, pretty and pink against his white skin. He was probably around 5 years old. He ran across the room to Marquis Revan's lap. It's not very becoming to run indoors, a woman's voice called after him. Her face was beautiful, but there was something melancholic about her. Perhaps the most fitting word was cheerless. The quality of her clothing was good, but the dress was a somewhat somber color. She bowed her head to Marquis Revan and then smiled faintly. When had my wife finally begun to smile, he suddenly recalled how things used to be. When the Marquis was younger, he harbored the ambition that any talented youth would acquiring the throne. He dreamed of irreverently usurping the crown. To a young Marquis confident in his quick wits, that was the most appropriate life goal. He devoted himself to his ambitions. He expanded his influence, collected wealth, made connections, and defeated his political rivals. Taking a wife had been merely another means to an end. If being married would increase his standing, he didn't care what sort of woman became his bride. In the end, a beautiful yet cheerless person came to him, but he didn't mind. The important thing was the connection to her parents. Their life as a married couple was normal. Rather, it was Marquis Revan's personal idea of normal. When he married her, he paid her the attention he would give any other tool. There was no love at all. Then something had changed him. The Marquis's gaze shifted to the child at his knees. When he first heard they were having a baby, he felt it would be one more tool. But when the newborn squeezed his finger, something inside him broke. The baby reminded him less of a squishy miniature human and more of a monkey. Revan never thought the baby was cute. But when he felt that faint warmth through his finger, somehow everything else seemed absurd. He suddenly felt the throne was no better than garbage. At some point, without realizing it, the man who had once burned with ambition was dead. He also recalled his wife's expression when he thanked her. He could never tell her, but it made him laugh whenever he remembered it. The thought, "Who are you?" was plain on her face. Of course, at first, she probably thought it was merely a temporary change, because she had borne him an heir. But the difference in how he acted eventually became strange. She began to wonder if the Marquis had gone mad. Apparently, she preferred her changed husband to her husband as he had been. Her mood had also begun to change. Essentially, they became a normal couple. At the moment, his child was trying to climb up, so Marquis Revan picked him up. The boy laughed as the Marquis brought him into his lap. He felt the high temperature particular to small children through his clothes. Moderate weight felt comfortable, and a peaceful satisfaction filled his heart. Now Marquis Revan had only one goal. He wanted to pass on his domain in perfect condition. It was a typical goal of a noble father. He gazed gently at his child in his lap and asked, "What's the matter, baby Lee?" He continued, "Smooch, smooch." There were only 2 people in the world who had seen the great noble scrunch up his lips and say, "Smooch, smooch." One of them, the child, squealed in delight. Dear, using baby talk with children isn't good for their language development. HMPH, nonsense. That's only an unfounded rumor, though that's what he said, Internally he knew he shouldn't do anything that might harm his son's education. He was sure his child was bound to be gifted. It was perfectly fine if his son wasn't, but it was only natural for a parent to want to encourage their child's strengths. At the same time, he certainly didn't want to be a bad influence on his son. But the one thing he couldn't give up was the loving nickname. Avoiding his wife and her slightly troubled expression, Revan addressed his son again. "Simone, baby Lee, what's wrong? Is there something you want to tell Daddy?" The child cupped his hands to his mouth as if he was sipping tea, intending to tell a secret. Seeing this adorable act, Marquis Revan felt the corners of his mouth soften affectionately. Nobody would believe that this face belonged to the man known by many as a snake. "What is it?" "Will you tell Daddy? Oh, I wonder what it is. So for dinner today, we having something you like. Wow, that makes Daddy so happy. What is it that we having tonight?" Gabura Fish Muni Ray, his wife, responded. "I see. Oh, what's the matter, baby Lee?" he asked in a hurry upon noticing the boy's sulky face. "I wanted to tell you." Marquis Revan felt like he had been struck by lightning from behind. "Oh no, I see. Sorry, baby Lee, that was all Daddy's fault." "Why did you tell me that?" In response to his furrowed brow and question, his wife put a hand over her face. The gesture seemed to say, "What am I going to do with you? Baby Lee, will you tell me then?" The pouting boy turned his head away. In response, Marquis Revan put on a violently shocked face full of such despair it seemed like he might choose death. "Sorry, baby Lee, Daddy's a dummy and already forgot. Could you tell me?" From the way the boy was peeking at him, he could tell it would take only a little more coaxing. "Can you tell Daddy?" "I might cry. Okay, it's your favorite fish." "Oh, Daddy's so happy." He smothered his boy's pink cheeks with kisses. It must have tickled because the child giggled innocently. "Ooh, okay, let us go eat. The meal has not been prepared yet." After all the build-up, it was a bit of a disappointment, and he looked discontent. It would be simple to tell the cook to hurry it up, but preparing a meal involved various steps and doing things in order with the correct pacing. The cook couldn't make an excellent meal for him if he threw off that rhythm out of pure selfishness. Dissatisfied though he was, he didn't give any orders. He wanted to feed his son food at its best. "All right, your father is busy working. Let us be on our way, okay?" Marquis Revan couldn't hide how lonely he felt when the boy's energetic voice rang out. "Oh ho, hold it right there. I finished my work already." "Really?" "Yes, don't worry, it's already done." "Is that true? You're not just putting it off until tomorrow?" Though his wife's eyes were icy, he didn't move to put the boy down. On the contrary, he squeezed his son tight. He felt the child's body heat so warm. "I was getting bogged down anyway. There's nothing left that needs to be done today." It wasn't just an excuse. It was true he didn't have any pressing matters that needed attending. Perhaps his wife sensed that. She nodded a few times. "I see, it seems like things have been rough." "They are. I don't need any more manual laborers, just brains. What about my younger brother?" "He's quite a brilliant fellow, but he's busy taking care of your home estate, isn't he? I couldn't call him here and put him to work. Is there anyone else you can think of who could help out?" He asked her this over and over. The response was always the same. There weren't any nobles who could handle things with skill comparable to Revan. If there were, he wouldn't be struggling so much. His only other option was to comb through the people. If they had a national education program like the Empire's, things may have been different, but without that, it was painstaking to search out hidden genius. All he could do was follow up on rumors of exceptionally bright individuals. Then he had to negotiate with the master of the domain they resided in. How much time and effort would that take? As he was sitting there disappointed, his son in his lap piped up. "I know, Daddy, I'll help you with your work." "Wow, thanks, baby Lee. I love you so much." The cute remark brought another flurry of kisses to the boy's cheeks. This time was sheer bliss for the Marquis. These moments allowed him to relax and forget the demands of his day-to-day tasks. He wouldn't hesitate to give his life to protect it. 2 months after the Empire's declaration, it was the season of white breaths. In villages around the kingdom, the people had transitioned from outdoor to indoor work. There weren't many out and about. Not many of them were busy during these months. That was true for adventurers as well, even if it seemed like they worked year-round without taking time off. Occasionally, a starving magical beast would appear in a village, or a sudden job would come in, but in general, there were not many requests. Searching for uncharted ruins or exploring secluded regions was too dangerous at this time of year. That made it the adventurer's off-season. They put their efforts into training, leisure, or side jobs. But in Fortress City Rantel, things were different. It was filled with a heated confusion. That said, it wasn't occupied by the same hustle and bustle as other cities in the kingdom. The excitement was born not of liveliness, but a different emotion. The source was the outermost of Rantel's 3 walls. Countless people had gathered there. Most of them didn't look very impressive. The majority were probably commoners, but their numbers were astounding. There had to be 250,000 people. It wasn't as if Rantel always had that many residents. Certainly, as a city that stood where 3 countries met, there was a lot of traffic. Goods, people, money, and all variety of other things were coming and going. A city like that inevitably grew. Even so, 250,000 in a single district was unrealistic. Why were so many people gathering there? Watching some of the young people provided a simple explanation. Many of them were training with bladeless spears. Outfitted with dented steel armor and shields, they practiced thrusting into wooden and straw targets. They were training for war. Yes, 250,000 of the kingdom's subjects were gathered there as conscripts for the war against the Empire. Energetic cries overlapped in the air. Of course, not many shouted eagerly. Most were frightened of the upcoming deadly battle. They felt compelled to train, knowing they wouldn't make it home alive if they didn't, but not everyone was taking the exercises seriously. War with the Empire happened every year. That left many people feeling despondent. Lacking motivation, one person was simply lying on the cobblestones in an inconspicuous corner. The gloomy man next to him was complaining. Another had curled up, hugging his knees. There were more like them in the older age brackets. These soldiers had no fighting spirit. Their only wish was to make it home alive. That was the reality of the kingdom's army, but what could be done? They had been ordered to come, robbed of their time, and forced to participate in a fight to the death that offered very little reward. Even if they survived, the instability in their basic lifestyle would continue to grow due to the time they lost. It was like a rope tightening around their necks. Surviving meant only a slower death. A wagon drove past the soldiers. The cargo bed bulged with a huge amount of foodstuffs. Common sense would say accommodating 3% of the kingdom's entire population in one city and supplying them was practically impossible. But Rantel was the forwardmost base in the fight against the Empire and the place where the kingdom's troops were being mustered. The conflict with the Empire had been repeated so many times that making preparations for 250,000 people had become laughably routine. The food storehouse was massive. It was probably the largest building in the city. There was a constant stream of supplies being carted out. The lethargic people eyed the wagon with fear, as if they were watching a god of death drift past. That was the mood that possessed those who knew what was about to happen. Transporting so much food could mean only one thing. War with the Empire was near. Rantel, within the innermost wall, the mansion of Mayor Panasoli Gruz de Retenmera stood in a central location. It was a splendid residence, worthy of the mayor's status. However, it was several grades inferior when compared to the building next door. That was the city's magnificent, honored guest house. It was opened only when the king or an equally important personage visited. Currently, a group of men occupied one of the rooms. This group was chiefly made up of Ramposa III and the great nobles. Gazef stood silently next to the king, who sat on a simple throne. In the center of the room was a large desk. Mainly nobles gathered around it, frowning at a large map that had been laid out. Several markers were on top of the map. Countless scattered papers surrounded it, the list of commanders, reports from reconnaissance units, records of previous battles, and information about monsters that appeared in the area. Almost no water was left in the jug the server standing in the back of the room held. That was an indication of how heated the debate had gotten. In fact, the great nobles' faces, dignified and shaped by history, seemed deeply fatigued. The army grew bigger, so more meetings were required and a greater variety of them. They could delegate basic things to their staff, but for matters the nobles had to arrange themselves, the leaders needed detailed discussions. Their honor was on the line. They couldn't bear to bring shame upon themselves, so there had been a considerable amount of work to do. But that was finally over. Marquis Revan, who showed the least fatigue of all present, spoke. He was always the one speaking out front. They called him a bat that flitted from one side to the other, but no one doubted his intelligence. Bipartisan meetings always went the most smoothly when he presided over them. I know you've all been busy, so thank you for coming. With this, our current round of preparations has been completed on time. Now, let us make our plans for this war with the Empire. Marquis Revan looked around at everyone and held up a piece of parchment so they could all see it. Several days ago, we received this declaration from the Empire. It stated the location for the battle. Specifying a location for battles was something opposing groups from the same race sometimes agreed to. This was because sites of battles had the potential to end up as cursed ground where undead would spawn. When both armies agreed, the contest for superiority would be held in a place neither country found problematic. Of course, not all wars went that way. In fact, those sorts of arrangements were rarer than not. But the kingdom and the empire had been agreeing on the site of their battles for several years. This was the result of both countries seeing eye to eye on a common issue. Unless they coordinated, any new territory they fought at, and one could have undead spawning nearby. This was a serious issue. Even if they somehow managed to defend against the undead, the land itself could be cursed, making the whole endeavor pointless. Relieved sighs could be heard around the room upon Marquis Revan's announcement. They could now treat the coming war as an extension of the past wars, since the same procedures were being followed. So the battlefield is don't make a fuss about it, Marquis Revan. It's the same place as every year, isn't it? Where else could it be? Yes, Marquis Bolarope. As you say, it's the same place as previous years. It's the foggy, cursed land of the Katsi plain, the northwestern part. Since they chose the same place as usual, do you think their plan of attack will be the same as well? Some were probably thinking that these arrangements proved that despite the declaration about the caster ain't Ulgaun's country, the Empire's real motive behind that nonsense was to simply create a reason for war. If that was all, Gazef might have agreed, but Marquis Revan shook his head. Sorry, Marquis Blumrush. Things likely aren't that simple. We've received reports that the Empire has mobilized a large number of soldiers. I had my former Orichalcum ranked adventurer team investigate. While they weren't sure about the exact numbers, they counted coats of arms for 6 corps. 6. The room was overcome with exclamations. The Imperial Knights had a total of 8 corps. The most that had ever participated in previous wars was 4. But this time they would be deploying 1.5 times that amount. Are they serious? One noble asked. He looked anxious. 6 corps meant 60,000 men. The kingdom had 250,000. This gave them the overwhelming numerical advantage. In terms of individual fighting power, however, the kingdom couldn't hold a candle to the empire. I don't know, someone said, but we should probably consider this different from the simple clashes of past years. Up until now, the war generally consisted of 200,000 against 40,000. The empire would charge and the kingdom would react. That was it. The empire's goal was to slowly exhaust the kingdom in the long term. Forcing them to exhaust their provisions was one part of that. If that was their aim this time as well, they wouldn't have needed to mobilize 60,000. In other words, they had some other objective. It would be a mistake to treat this the same as their past fights. That was how Marquis Revan saw it. It was a good idea to increase our numbers this time. Unfortunately, the increased manpower also created the headache of increased war expenses. In past years, the Empire had timed their attack to coincide with the harvest season. But this year it was winter, so there were additional costs involved, such as procuring firewood. The king was supposed to cover those costs. If the King's faction hadn't gained more influence recently, they wouldn't have been able to gather enough contributions, and his power would have dropped significantly. But Marquis Revan, don't you think they could just be mobilizing more soldiers than usual to maintain face in front of their ally, the caster who calls himself a king? The Empire took the lead in declaring war on us. If they didn't mobilize a large army and actually fight us, it wouldn't be good for appearances. I think there's certainly a chance that is the case. Also, we haven't received any word from Aints Ulgaun. It's possible this is entirely the Empire's initiative. Aints Ulgaun may have gotten involved somehow. It could even be against his will. If that was the case, Gazef would be extremely happy, personally speaking. What a relief it would be to not have that great caster as an enemy. But that line of thinking was too optimistic. Gazef had kept his mouth shut until this point, but now he spoke. May I say something? Go ahead. Having received the king's permission, Gazef stated his worry. I don't think that theory is very likely. Given the letter we received from the slain theocracy, I just can't imagine this being a superficial political move. All the nobles looked annoyed. The area around Rantel was of interest to 3 countries, so whenever the empire and the kingdom had their scuffle, the theocracy would declare war as well. The notices they sent always claimed that the Rantel area formerly belonged to the theocracy. They said the kingdom was unjustly occupying it. Every year, the theocracy demanded the kingdom return the land to its rightful owner. They said it was a shame the empire and the kingdom were up in arms over a right that wasn't even theirs to fight over. Both countries wanted to tell the theocracy to stay out of it, but since the theocracy had never actually mobilized any forces, they interpreted those letters as nothing but talk. But the latest one was quite different. The theocracy has no records on these matters, so it is difficult to determine. But if Aints Ulgaun truly once ruled those lands, then we recognize the validity of his claims.